Elon Musk acted homeless for a social experiment to test how homeless people feel. Elon Musk stood at the corner of a bustling downtown street, dressed in layers of dirty clothing. Over the past few days, he had allowed his hair to grow unruly, and a faint layer of stubble now shadowed his jaw. At first glance, there was nothing to suggest he was anything other than a homeless man seeking spare change or a warm meal. People hurried by, casting him indifferent looks, or no looks at all, as they clutched their phones and briefcases. This was precisely what Elon intended. It was all part of a private social experiment he had devised. He wanted to see firsthand how individuals treated someone society considered an outcast. He had chosen a chilly evening on which to conduct this experiment, ensuring that even stepping outside was a test of will. The city's elite were arriving at expensive restaurants and high-end clubs, their polished shoes tapping across polished sidewalks. The well-to-do crowd took little notice of a ragged figure standing near the curb. Some even crossed the street to avoid him. Elon observed it all, taking in every sidelong glance and scornful whisper, determined to remain anonymous for as long as possible. Tugging a frayed jacket closer around his thinly disguised frame, he checked the time on a battered watch he had purchased at a second-hand shop. It was nearly 9 p.m. That meant the exclusive club he planned to enter, known for its exorbitant membership fees and strict dress code, would be in full swing. He chose this particular establishment because of its reputation as a playground for affluent socialites, precisely the sort of place where outward appearances held more weight than character or accomplishments. Adjusting his wool cap, Elon started down the sidewalk. Passing elegant storefronts that displayed designer suits and glittering jewelry, he couldn't help but reflect on the irony. He owned entire companies dedicated to cutting-edge technology and space exploration, yet tonight he was swathed in clothing that smelled faintly of damp cardboard and stale coffee, props carefully sourced to help him blend in with the city's less fortunate. His heart pounded with anticipation. This was not the type of experiment that came with data charts or rocket schematics. Rather, it was about observing raw human nature. He knew that if he was recognized too early, people would bend over backward to accommodate him, shower him with praise, free gifts, special treatment. He did not want that. He wanted honesty. When Elon finally reached the entrance of the club, the facade was exactly as he expected. A grand, ornate doorway framed by Corinthian columns and illuminated by golden lights. A red velvet rope marked the boundary between those who belonged and those who did not. Two security guards stood at the threshold like sentinels, each clad in a crisp suit. Their expressions were a mix of boredom and faint superiority, the kind that came from regulating the flow of wealthy clientele. Elon approached calmly, stepping off the sidewalk and into the path leading to the door. Immediately, the nearest security guard, an imposing man with a buzz cut, took a quick stride forward, his gaze zeroing in on Elon's disheveled appearance. "Stop right there," the guard barked, planting a hand on Elon's chest. He looked Elon over, from the worn-out shoes to the tattered hat. A sneer curled his upper lip. "This isn't a shelter. We don't hand out food here." Elon offered a polite nod, feigning a meek demeanor. "I'm actually here for a friend. He said I could meet him inside." The second guard, slightly older and sporting a neatly trimmed mustache, stepped closer. He scanned Elon's face with open disdain. "Do you even know where you are? This is one of the most exclusive clubs in the country. It's by invitation only, and you obviously don't have one." Elon reached into his pocket, producing a folded piece of paper that resembled a note with a name scribbled on it. He had arranged for a business acquaintance, someone who knew about the experiment, to leave a note at the front desk, granting him entry under a pseudonym. The name on the paper was not Elon Musk, but rather an alias, so the staff wouldn't suspect his true identity. "I have an invitation," he insisted gently. "It might not look like the fancy cards you're used to, but it's valid. Please check with the desk." The buzz-cut guard took the note, glanced at it, and snorted. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You look like you haven't showered in days. You honestly expect us to believe you belong in there?" "I'm just doing what I was told," Elon replied, voice soft but unwavering. He could feel a hint of anger rising. He was being dehumanized because of how he looked. Yet this was precisely why he'd come, to see whether they would turn him away without a second thought. The mustached guard threw his colleague a meaningful look. Take it in to the hostess. See if it's real. I'll keep an eye on this one. With a begrudging nod, the buzz-cut guard retreated inside, leaving Elon standing under the critical gaze of the other. Shivering slightly in the cold, Elon let his gaze wander to the well-dressed patrons coming and going. Women in designer gowns, men in tailored suits, all of them breezing past with curiosity or contempt flickering in their eyes as they noticed the homeless man out front. After several minutes, the younger guard returned. He looked both puzzled and irritated. It checks out, he announced grudgingly. Apparently he's on the list as a guest. The hostess told me to let him in. The mustached guard seemed genuinely taken aback. He gave Elon a skeptical glance. This is highly unusual, but orders are orders. Keep in mind we have a strict dress code and you're violating every part of it. I understand, Elon said, offering a small smile. Thank you for letting me through. With clear reluctance, the guards unhooked the velvet rope. Elon stepped forward, pushing open the heavy doors to the club's lavish interior. He was immediately greeted by a wave of warm air, scented with expensive perfumes, colognes, and the aroma of gourmet appetizers being carried on silver trays. Inside, everything gleamed. A chandelier dangled from the vaulted ceiling, scattering prisms of light across polished floors. Large paintings in ornate frames lined the walls, and plush velvet curtains draped over tall windows. Soft orchestral music played in the background, setting a mood of genteel sophistication. He had barely taken more than a few steps when a uniformed hostess approached, her expression unreadable. She flicked her eyes to his ragged coat, the holes in his pant legs, and the battered shoes on his feet. Her professional training kept her from outright sneering, but her tone contained an unmistakable note of disapproval. Welcome to the Royal Terrace Club, she said with a forced politeness. You must be Mr. Eric Summers? She referenced the alias Elon had given. That's me, he replied. She paused for a beat, as if waiting for an explanation for his attire. When none was offered, she continued, We have a private room reserved for you and your party if you'd like to wait there until they arrive. That would be perfect, Elon said with a nod. Lead the way. As they made their way across the opulent foyer, guests parted like a sea, some recoiling slightly when they noticed his threadbare clothes. A man in a white dinner jacket made a loud, snide remark to his companion as Elon passed. I didn't realize this club was taking charity cases. The companion giggled, cupping her mouth. Several others cast scornful looks, openly wondering how he had managed to infiltrate their exclusive sanctuary. Elon pretended not to hear. He focused instead on observing how people reacted. Many gave him haughty stares, whispering to each other. A few laughed openly, making no effort to hide their contempt. So far, not a single person, aside from the hostess doing her job, had greeted him with genuine kindness. Eventually, the hostess showed him to a small, luxurious salon, adorned with leather armchairs and a marble fireplace. A single table in the center displayed an arrangement of crystal glasses and assorted cheeses. The hostess gestured at the room. Feel free to make yourself comfortable. May I offer you a drink or any hors d'oeuvres? Elon shook his head. Water is fine. She left, closing the door behind her, and Elon was momentarily alone. He inhaled a steadying breath, feeling the tension of the experiment weigh on him. On a normal day, he would have arrived in a well-pressed suit or a simple blazer, nothing too extravagant, but presentable enough to pass muster. Tonight, however, the entire point was to test the club's moral fiber and see if anyone would treat him like a fellow human being despite his disheveled appearance. He had barely settled into a chair when the door opened again. This time, an older gentleman in a tuxedo ambled in, looking around as though searching for something. Upon seeing Elon in his ragged clothes, the man's eyes widened. Oh! The man exclaimed, pausing in the doorway. Sorry, I thought this was the private room for the evening's special guests. It is, Elon replied calmly. The older gentleman's confusion was evident. He lifted his brows. Are you with the philanthropic roundtable discussion? Yes, that's correct. A pause followed, during which the older man clearly wrestled with the mismatch between Elon's appearance and the high-profile nature of the event. Quickly regaining composure, the gentleman offered a polite but stiff nod. I suppose I'll come back later. The rest of the group should be arriving soon. Without giving Elon a chance to speak further, the man slipped back out, gently closing the door as if retreating from an awkward confrontation. Elon exhaled. It was a mild reaction, possibly the least hostile he had encountered so far, but still charged with the unspoken assumption that a homeless man had no business in such a refined space. Minutes ticked by. Curiosity got the better of Elon, and he decided to venture back into the main hall to see more of how people would treat him. Stepping out, he found himself in a corridor with gilded mirrors and plush carpeting that led to a grand ballroom. Live classical music drifted through the air, courtesy of a string quartet perched on a small stage. Glancing around, Elon saw an array of cocktail tables populated by the city's elite. Women in shimmering gowns stood chatting with men in tuxedos or expensive business suits. The wealthy patrons had formed small cliques, each sporting practiced smiles as they jockeyed for social advantage. Servers floated among them with trays of champagne flutes and appetizers. The moment Elon stepped into the ballroom, a noticeable hush spread through the guests nearest him, as if his presence had disrupted the carefully curated ambiance. Murmurs ensued, quiet, disbelieving, and tinged with scorn. He wandered to a table featuring miniature quiches, ignoring the disapproving stares. A middle-aged woman with coiffed hair and glittering earrings turned to her companion, a tall man in a tailored suit, and said in a not-so-subtle tone, "Is this some sort of performance art piece, or did they forget to close the side entrance?" The man let out a short, mirthless laugh. "I've never seen them let those people in here." He leaned toward Elon. "Hey, buddy," he called out. "Are you lost?" Elon shook his head politely. "Just looking around." "Looking around," echoed a younger man who had been sampling the hors d'oeuvres. He gave Elon a dismissive wave. "You got a ticket for tonight's event? Or are you searching for cans to recycle?" A snicker coursed through the small group, emboldening others who overheard. Their glances turned bolder and more mocking. Another bystander chimed in. "Maybe he's trying to see how the other half lives." "Don't worry, we'll toss you a few dollars if that's what you're after." Elon felt a surge of anger, but he suppressed it. He was prepared for hostility, but the unabashed cruelty still stung. He realized many of these individuals had never been challenged on their prejudices, and tonight they felt free to voice them without restraint. Just then, a new voice intervened, a gentle, quivering one. "Why don't you let him be?" an older woman said, stepping forward from a nearby table. She looked to be in her 70s, wearing a modest but tasteful black dress with a simple pearl necklace. Her hair, white and set into soft curls, framed a kind face. "He's not bothering anyone," she went on. "We should be better than this." A wave of mild embarrassment washed over a few of those mocking Elon. The younger man scowled and shrugged. "We were just joking around," he said defensively. "Relax." The older woman shook her head disapprovingly. Then she looked at Elon with compassion in her eyes. "Are you all right? Do you need anything?" Elon offered her a small smile. It was the first true kindness he had encountered since walking through the door. He replied quietly, "I'm fine, ma'am. But thank you for asking." She nodded, though she still appeared troubled by the crowd's behavior. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said simply, and then she stepped away, perhaps sensing Elon's desire to remain inconspicuous. The group of onlookers seemed unsure how to react to this subtle reproach. Some turned away, feigning interest in the music or the appetizers, while others continued to stare at Elon as though he were some odd exhibit. Elon decided to move on, stepping deeper into the ballroom. He spotted a corner lined with ornate chairs and took a seat, intending to continue his observations. But as he sat, a woman in a sequined gown approached, placing her manicured hand on the back of the chair next to him. "Darling," she said in an excessively sweet tone, addressing Elon, "I think you might be in the wrong place. Let me help you find the exit." Her companion, a smug-looking man sporting an emerald-studded tie clip, snickered. "Yes, I hear there's a soup kitchen a few blocks down. Might be more comfortable for you. Elon felt a flash of irritation. His mind flicked to the billions of dollars he had spent on research and development, the endless hours he'd devoted to changing the world through technology and sustainable energy. Yet here, in this setting, none of that mattered, because people believed he was homeless. He looked at the woman calmly. I have a reason to be here, he said. I'm part of a philanthropic meeting that's supposed to take place tonight. She arched an eyebrow, openly skeptical. In that outfit? Before Elon could reply, another cluster of guests joined in, adding to the chorus of jibes. The negativity swirled around him, each remark more condescending than the last. Someone joked about the club installing a new homeless decor. Another quipped that he should at least borrow a jacket so he didn't soil the furniture. Elon clenched his jaw, doing his best to keep cool. The sheer cruelty of the crowd was sobering. He had witnessed snobbery before, but never so concentrated and unabashed. Just then, a boisterous voice emerged from behind the group. What's going on here? Demanded a tall, broad-shouldered man in a lavish pinstripe suit. He had an air of authority about him and wore a gold watch that glinted under the overhead lights. Several people parted to let him through, looking relieved that someone important was intervening. Elon recognized the man's face from local business magazines. He was a wealthy entrepreneur named Carlton Greer, rumored to be a major donor to this club. Greer surveyed the situation, his gaze finally landing on Elon. A smirk twisted his lips. Well, Greer said, addressing the crowd, it looks like the club's letting in just about anyone these days, don't you think? Or maybe we're hosting a costume party. A ripple of laughter greeted this remark. Elon stood, feeling the tension radiate through his limbs. I'm here for a meeting, he repeated, his voice calm but edged with annoyance. And I'd appreciate if people could treat me like a human being for 5 minutes. Greer chuckled. Fair enough, but you do realize this is a private establishment, right? We tend to have standards. Standards that include cruelty to strangers? Elon shot back. A hush fell over the group, the unexpected retort landing sharply. Greer's smirk faded, replaced by a mild scowl. Watch your tone, he said coldly. Who are you exactly? Elon crossed his arms. I'm nobody special, just a man testing how you treat someone who appears homeless. The hush deepened, broken only by a few scoffs of disbelief. One woman muttered, This is absurd, while another shook her head and whispered to a friend, He's clearly delusional. Greer gave a dismissive wave. A social experiment, is that what you're calling it? Well, you've had your fun. You can see that we don't appreciate your intrusion. I'm sure you can shuffle back to the streets now. A wave of approving murmurs passed through the crowd, and they all seemed to turn away, as if expecting Elon to leave in shame. But he remained rooted to the spot, a resolute calm now settling over him. His eyes flicked briefly to the older woman who had stood up for him moments ago. She was still watching from a distance, her face reflecting concern and empathy. Elon felt a sudden urge to end this charade. He reminded himself of the original plan. Observe, collect data on how people responded, then quietly exit. Yet, the viciousness on display, and the memory of that kind older woman's compassion, spurred him to do something more dramatic. His quiet observation would no longer suffice. Standing taller, Elon cleared his throat. You all make a great show of your wealth and refinement, he said, letting his voice carry. But not a single one of you, except for this kind lady, has shown any decency. Your suits, your gowns, your expensive watches, none of it masks the fact that you behave like bullies to someone you deem beneath you. Murmurs of indignation rippled through the gathering. Greer stepped forward, face reddening. How dare you speak to us like that? That's exactly what I mean, Elon replied calmly. You're more offended by my words than your own lack of empathy. This entire club is built on exclusivity, on turning away anyone who doesn't fit a certain mold. You're proud of it, you flaunt it, and you think it entitles you to treat people like trash. Laughter, derision, and a few scattered cheers from onlookers who enjoyed a spectacle filled the air. But Elon noticed a slight shift, a flicker of uncertainty in some of their expressions. He decided it was time to reveal the truth. He reached up and removed the knit cap, ruffling his messy hair so that it fell naturally. Then he peeled away the outer layers of ragged clothing, revealing underneath a plain but clean shirt that had been concealed. From an inside pocket, he took out a phone and tapped rapidly on the screen. It was as though he were shedding the skin of a homeless man, adopting a more composed posture. "What are you doing?" someone in the crowd demanded, leaning in. Elon locked eyes with Greer. "You asked who I am. Let me enlighten you. My name is Elon Musk." A stunned silence swept the ballroom. For a moment, people seemed to collectively forget to breathe. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and a few guests even took an involuntary step backward. It was as though someone had flipped a switch, transforming hostility into shock and frantic attempts to process the information. "You're Elon Musk?" a middle-aged man repeated, his voice quivering. Elon nodded. "Yes. I came here in disguise to see how this club's patrons would treat someone who appeared homeless. I hoped to find compassion, or at least simple politeness. Instead, nearly all of you jumped at the chance to mock me, to drive me away, to behave like I'm subhuman." The crowd broke into an uproar of hurried whispers. Some insisted it couldn't be true, that perhaps it was some elaborate ruse. Others, who recognized Elon's face from countless interviews and articles, stood aghast. The older woman who had been kind to him now wore a small, relieved smile, as if heartened by the validation of her empathy. Greer looked positively ill. He tried to stammer out an apology. "Mr. Musk, if we had known, it was just a misunderstanding. We thought you were truly—" "I was truly homeless in your eyes," Elon cut in, voice steeled with outrage. "And that was enough for you to decide I wasn't worthy of basic respect." A ripple of uneasy agreement passed through some onlookers as they recalled their own words and actions. They realized how petty, shallow, and downright cruel they had appeared. Many began offering stammered excuses, each more desperate than the last. "I didn't mean anything by it. I was just joking. We're not used to seeing strangers here, especially not in those clothes." Elon ignored their pleas. Turning to the older woman, he smiled. "You, however, showed me kindness when no one else would. You reminded these people that it takes very little to be compassionate." Her eyes misted. She lowered her gaze shyly. "I just did what anyone should do. I didn't want them to pick on you." Elon reached into his shirt pocket and retrieved a slim checkbook he kept on him for certain philanthropic situations. With a decisive flourish, he wrote out a check, tore it loose, and handed it to her. $1 million, he announced, loud enough for all to hear. "Use it however you see fit. Help family, donate to charity, invest. It's my way of saying thank you for reminding me there's at least one decent person in this room." The woman gasped, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. She clutched the check with trembling hands. Around her, the other patrons stood in stunned silence, torn between awe, envy, and regret. Some stared at the check, obviously lamenting that they had not displayed kindness themselves. That's too much," she stammered, overwhelmed. Elon shook his head gently. "It's never too much for genuine compassion." Suddenly, the tension in the room intensified. Realizing what they had lost, an opportunity to impress one of the most influential people in the world, a few guests rushed forward, stumbling over their words as they tried to apologize or explain. Someone clutched Elon's arm, insisting they had never really meant to mock him, that it was all a misunderstanding. Another offered to personally fund a charitable initiative in the city, hoping to curry favor. "Please, Mr. Musk," one man begged. "I've always admired your work. SpaceX, Tesla. I just didn't know it was you." Elon extricated himself from the throng, eyes hard with anger. "That's exactly the problem," he said, raising his voice. "If I had been just another homeless man, you'd have kept sneering and laughing. None of you would have cared in the slightest. You care only because you realize I have money and power to affect your lives. This hypocrisy is the reason I came here tonight." Greer, who had been quiet in the face of this public shaming, took a tentative step forward. "Mr. Musk," he ventured, "let me extend our sincerest apologies on behalf of the entire club. We didn't act as we should have. If you'd like, I can arrange a meeting with our board and. Don't bother, Elon interjected. I have another plan in mind. He pulled out his phone again, tapping rapidly as the guests waited in tense silence. Then he looked up, eyes flicking across the gilded room. This club, how much is it worth? He asked. A hush fell. Greer's throat bobbed as he swallowed nervously. I'm not sure, he stammered. Several of us hold shares. The market value is. Get me a ballpark figure, Elon said, voice cutting through the confusion. Another man, presumably on the club's board, piped up. Considering the property, the brand, and the exclusivity, it's valued at maybe $100 million, give or take. Elon gave a curt nod. That sounds about right. Without missing a beat, he spoke into the phone again. I'm going to buy it. A collective gasp swept the room. A few people exclaimed in disbelief. You can't be serious, one cried out, while another muttered, Is that even possible? Elon responded by holding up a hand for silence. Money is not an issue, he said calmly. I'll pay whatever price is needed to assume full ownership. I've already sent the inquiry. It's just a matter of drawing up the paperwork. Greer and several others rushed toward him, nearly tripping over each other. We can negotiate, one said frantically. Maybe we can find a more reasonable approach. Elon's eyes flashed. I'm not interested in negotiations. A tense pause followed before he continued, his tone echoing with authority. Once I own this place, it will no longer be a playground for the elite. I'm turning it into a homeless shelter. If the room had been on edge before, this declaration set it ablaze. Cries of outrage and astonishment mingled in the air. People demanded explanations, insisted Elon was making a rash decision, or begged him to reconsider. The club had been a cornerstone of their social lives, a place where they conducted business deals and flaunted their status. Now it would be a refuge for those they'd spent the evening ridiculing. Elon stood amid the turmoil, arms folded, gaze unwavering. You heard me correctly, he said. I've already poured billions into various philanthropic and technological ventures to better the world. Converting this club into a homeless shelter is only a drop in the ocean, but it's a meaningful drop. Here, in the heart of an upscale district, we'll provide beds, meals, medical care, education, and job training. Maybe it'll spark a broader shift in how we treat the less fortunate. Greer tried a desperate tactic. Mr. Musk, please think of the property values. The neighbors will never allow. Elon silenced him with a single glare. Are you truly talking about property values right now? Look at yourselves. You judged me for looking homeless, and now you're more worried about real estate than human lives. He pivoted to address the entire room, raising his voice so no one could mistake his words. I don't care about your property values, your exclusivity, or your so-called standards. If this club and you people had shown even a shred of humanity tonight, perhaps I would have walked away quietly. But it's clear the only way to teach a lesson is to take away the very symbol of your arrogance. A flurry of protests erupted. Some of the wealthier members muttered about finding lawyers or calling in favors, while others simply pleaded with Elon, promising to donate to whatever cause he championed if only he would let them keep their precious club. Elon shook his head in contempt. Apologies after the fact are hollow when your actions spoke loudly the first time. Amid this uproar, the older woman who had offered him kindness earlier stood off to the side, tears still in her eyes as she gripped the $1 million check. She watched in amazement as the man she had helped turned an entire institution on its head. Noticing her, Elon softened. He walked across the room to where she stood and spoke quietly, though everyone else strained to hear. Thank you, he said, voice thick with gratitude. Your compassion was genuine, and you had no idea who I was. That's why it mattered. She dabbed at her eyes, trembling. I just did what anyone should. I'm so sorry that everyone else. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Don't apologize. I wish more people were like you. Then, turning back to face the gawking crowd, Elon gestured toward the doors. As for the rest of you who taunted and belittled me, I suggest you leave, right now. This club is under new ownership, effective immediately, and you're no longer welcome." It was as though a mighty wind blew through the ballroom, scattering the once proud patrons. Some slunk away in embarrassment, heads lowered as they mumbled curses under their breath. Others offered frantic excuses. "It was just a joke. We never meant any harm." But Elon's stony expression left them no recourse. One by one, they drifted out of the building, their expensive shoes clacking against the marble floor in a march of shame. When the last of the mockers had gone, Elon turned to the older woman and the small handful of staff who had not joined in the bullying. The hostess stood behind the desk, looking torn between awe and anxiety, while a couple of bartenders exchanged uncertain glances. Elon cleared his throat. "If any of you wish to help turn this place into a proper resource for the homeless, you may stay," he announced. "I'll fund everything, the renovations, salaries, training programs, but the mission will be entirely different from what it was." Relief spread across the faces of some staff members who depended on their jobs and had not taken part in the cruelty. They nodded, offering to do what they could. One bartender in particular admitted that he'd always felt uncomfortable with how the club treated people it deemed unworthy. Before the night was out, Elon's legal team, alerted by his messages, arrived to begin the purchase negotiations. By dawn, the preliminary paperwork was signed, making him the de facto owner of the property. Over the ensuing weeks, the transformation began in earnest. The gilded rooms and pricey decor were replaced with practical facilities, bunk beds, showers, a cafeteria, and areas designated for job training and mental health counseling. A clinic was set up in what had once been a lavish lounge, providing basic medical care and referrals for more serious issues. News of Elon Musk's bold move spread like wildfire, igniting a nationwide conversation about homelessness, compassion, and the pitfalls of superficial judgment. Some people criticized his method, calling it theatrical or impulsive, but many more praised the immediate, tangible impact. Within months, the newly christened Open Doors shelter welcomed hundreds of people who had been sleeping on park benches and in underpasses. Through partnerships with local nonprofits and city officials, Elon scaled up the effort. He arranged for job fairs, skill workshops, and apprenticeship programs to be held in the former ballroom, connecting individuals with potential employers. He also funded mental health counselors and social workers, ensuring residents received comprehensive support rather than a quick fix. Soon, the city began to see a measurable decrease in the homeless population. Word spread that Elon Musk had not just opened one shelter, but had also invested in affordable housing initiatives throughout the region. Additional properties were purchased, renovated, and staffed by professionals dedicated to empowering the homeless to regain stability. The older woman who had shown him kindness on that fateful night became a beloved figure at Open Doors Shelter. She volunteered regularly, using part of her newfound wealth to provide special services, like a small library and a quiet reading room for residents looking to study, relax, or lose themselves in books. Her $1 million check changed her life, but she never lost the warmth and compassion that had led her to defend a stranger in rags. Meanwhile, the former patrons who had mocked Elon found themselves at a crossroads. Some continued to nurse their bitterness, refusing to acknowledge their wrongdoing. Others publicly apologized, acknowledging they had learned a hard lesson about judging others. A select few, humbled by the ordeal, even began volunteering at the shelter, seeking to atone for their callousness. As time passed, the impact of Elon's initiative became undeniable. He poured resources into programs aimed at eradicating homelessness on a broader scale. He lobbied the government to allocate more funds towards supportive housing and mental health services. Through combined efforts, new shelters and rehabilitation centers sprang up across the country, inspired by the successful model at Open Doors. With every success story, every person who found stable employment, moved into permanent housing, or reunited with estranged family members, Elon's vision gained momentum. He used his vast social media presence to highlight these personal triumphs, shifting public perception of the homeless from faceless statistics to individuals with hopes, dreams, and untapped potential. In policy circles, politicians took note. Local jurisdictions began to replicate aspects of Elon's approach, blending public funding with private philanthropy and community engagement. Over the course of several years, entire regions saw their homeless populations decline sharply as more people accessed the integrated services they needed to rebuild their lives. Critics who once dismissed Elon's act as a publicity stunt found themselves acknowledging that real, lasting change was happening before their eyes. Eventually, stories emerged of entire tent encampments being dismantled, not by force, but because those living there had moved into new housing or found gainful employment. The grand gesture at that elite club had evolved into a national movement, demonstrating that homelessness could be systematically reduced with enough collective will. On a bright autumn morning, a few years after the night Elon first stepped into that club dressed as a homeless man, a special ceremony took place at the former site of the Royal Terrace Club, now the thriving open door shelter. The city's mayor, several nonprofit leaders, and citizens whose lives had been changed by the shelter gathered to celebrate a milestone. The shelter had helped over 10,000 individuals transition to permanent housing. The older woman with the pearl necklace was there, beaming with quiet pride. She had become a friend and mentor to many residents, always offering a soft word of encouragement or a comforting hug. Elon stood on a modest stage erected in the courtyard, overlooking what used to be the club's meticulously manicured lawn. It now featured a garden where shelter residents grew vegetables and flowers, a testament to new beginnings. A microphone crackled as the crowd settled. In a speech that was broadcast live across multiple channels, Elon addressed the audience with humility and determination. "We turned a symbol of exclusion into one of hope," he began. "I didn't do it alone. It took the effort of caring people, nonprofits, government officials, and especially the homeless individuals themselves, who worked tirelessly to change their own circumstances. But let's not forget how this started, with cruelty, with people judging someone based on outward appearance. That's the real lesson here. If we dare to look beyond what someone wears, to see the human being behind the ragged clothes, we might realize how much potential and dignity they carry. My experiment showed me that too many people fail that basic test of empathy. This shelter is living proof that we can address homelessness if we have the will to act. We've reduced it dramatically in our city, and we're seeing results across the country. Is there more work to do? Absolutely. But let this place serve as a reminder that real solutions begin with changing our attitudes, deciding not to look away, and choosing to make a difference." He paused, letting the applause settle. Then he raised his voice slightly. "And to those who once turned me away or mocked me in my disguise, I harbor no ill will. I hope you've learned, as I have, that no one should ever be judged by their appearance alone. Wealth doesn't make a person better, just as poverty doesn't make a person worse. Compassion is the one currency we can all afford to spend." A standing ovation followed, led by individuals who had experienced homelessness firsthand. They cheered with a fervor that spoke of gratitude and renewed hope. The older woman dabbed her eyes once more, recalling the night she saw a man who looked homeless and did the simplest act. She treated him kindly. In her heart, she believed that one small gesture of decency had helped spark a revolution of empathy. In the end, Elon's experiment had outgrown its initial goal. It became a catalyst for reshaping attitudes and policies around homelessness, demonstrating that even the most entrenched problems could yield to bold, decisive action, if only people would remember not to judge a book by its cover. As he stepped down from the stage, Elon quietly reflected on how a single evening of cruelty had birthed one of the most impactful philanthropic endeavors of his life. The final remnants of the old club, marble columns and gilded ceiling medallions, reminded him of a time when external polish masked internal decay. Now, those same walls reverberated with laughter, hope, and the promise of better tomorrows for those society had once overlooked. In that final moment, while staff and volunteers swirled around him and newly arrived residents filed in for a tour, Elon allowed himself a small, contented smile. He had set out to test the morality of those who prided themselves on their status, and in doing so, he had found a renewed sense of purpose. No longer would people walk by a disheveled figure without understanding that every person, homeless or otherwise, deserved dignity, and a once exclusive club had become, quite literally, an open door to a brighter future.